Welcome back to Cricket Central, the podcast where we discuss all the stories, big and small, for our day 4 recap of the first test between Australia and West Indies, live from Perth. Australia begun the day on 1 for 29, and the first session was, well, all the Australians and all the story of Marnus again bringing up another century and becoming just the 8th person to score a double century and a century in the same test, only the 3rd Australian. So, I mean, we seem to be talking about Marnus a lot, but he just keeps doing it. After that, Australia declared, and the second session was really almost a repeat of the first innings of West Indies. The two openers being very stolid in defence, hanging around, depriving Australia of any wicket chances, and they got through that session unscathed, I think. And it set up quite an interesting final session. They were none for 84 at tea. And in the final session, it was the story of Kraigg Brathwaite scoring his first century against Australia, and really a very impressive knock in the end. Tangerine Chanderpaul fell for 45 to Stark. Sharma Brooks caught Smith bowled line for 11, and then just before the end of the day, Jermaine Backwood gone for 24, which puts West Indies on 3 for 192, so still 306 runs behind, but a bit of happiness for the West Indies with that century. Peerson, how did you see the day's play?
Yeah, I mean, I admit I don't have too much to talk about now because you've covered it pretty well in terms of analogizing the entire day. I'd say most of that was pretty bang on. I thought there's an argument that that's possibly the Windies' best day of this test thus far. But unfortunately, they started it so far behind that I don't think it will be any sort of a contest. I certainly am pleased to see they've at least put a bit of fight in. 192 for 3 is a good spot to be in at the end of a 4th innings run chase, so I'll give them that. I don't think it will prove particularly close. I think they'll come at least 100 runs short in the end, probably more. But no, I thought there was at least a bit of fight there. I thought some of the best bit of bowling I've seen all tests came through today from the West Indies with Joseph, and even a spell by, I think, Kemar Roach just after that. And then, of course, we had the Kraigg Brathwaite 100 was a feat of accomplished batting. So, no, it's definitely been a better and at least more balanced watch than some of the previous ones. But, yeah, I think the game is now out of the West Indies' reach.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. But as you say, there were some good moments for them. In particular, that spell of Joseph to Marnus Labuschagne, where he was, a couple of edges and looked very unsettled for a while there. The question I have is why this is the first we've seen of that. Really, him in particular in the first innings looked very placid, really. Do you think he's sort of, I don't know, worked out what he needs to do a bit more on Australian pitches now, and we could see a bit more in the next test?
Honestly, not really. I think, like a lot of West Indian bowlers of late, he's just a bit inconsistent. When he gets it right, he is a very impressive bowler. He bowls 140 plus quite regularly. He can hit a hard length and trouble a batsman. But I think, as we saw pretty much all test bar a couple spells like the one we're bringing up here, he just didn't have the consistency to do so. Of what I've seen of what is a somewhat fledgling test career to date, he just doesn't really have a consistent line and length that he's able to stick to. He can be dangerous, but he's a touch erratic, which is why he always trails, particularly in economy, to more experienced campaigners like a Kemar Roach or a Jason Holder. If he could hit that more consistently, yes, I think he'd be very useful. We've seen Labuschagne struggle at times against that short ball. I know he went out a few times cheaply to Mark Wood in last year's Ashes. That became a talking point. Became a talking point with Joseph again today. So maybe there is something to this. Maybe there's a fallibility that could be exploited. But for the moment, I'm not convinced Joseph has the ability and the temperament to hang it on that back of a length line 6 balls and over for a day straight. But maybe, you never know. If he can, it'll make for an interesting second test.
Yeah, I think the thing is, to be successful in Test cricket as a bowler, you've either got to be very consistent or have express pace. And unfortunately, Joseph really most of the time doesn't really have either of
Yep,
those
I'd
things.
agree.
I think you'd have to say.
No.
Um, and really, we do have to speak about Marnus though, because when he got through that spell of Azari Joseph, he did go on to score a century. And it was another one of those innings which have becoming quite characteristic of Marnus, where he just seems to have everything fall his way. He had 29 edges, 16 plays and misses, 7 expected dismissals. I'm not exactly sure how they worked that out, but that was the stats. So, and actually, there was another stat. It really is becoming a pattern for him. This luck, I guess you would have to call it. Labuschagne's been dropped 16 times since he came back into the Test team in 2019, compared to 20 catches, which is a conversion rate of 55.5%. Which is the second lowest conversion rate of chances to catches, with the lowest being Dimuth Karunaratne for Sri Lanka, interestingly. But so really, what do you call this? Is this just Marnus getting lucky, or does it actually show something about him as a batsman?
Well, I mean, there's always it always annoys me slightly, these things, because I do actually agree. I think he's an incredibly lucky cricketer at times. So is Ben Stokes. I remember not too long ago, it was always those two that led the dropped per taken catch stats or whatever they were. So yes, he does get dropped a lot, but you have to give him credit. He makes teams pay when they drop him. He got a bit lucky today. He got a bit lucky in the first innings. He did hit 200 and now an unbeaten ton. So he does know what he's doing. It's very impressive batting. Yes, if teams took their catches, but you can always say that. Some players it just happens for more than others. You'd imagine, as the people that know more maths than I do could probably argue, there will be some degree of transgression to the mean at some point. And when that happens, maybe the average will drop, maybe it won't. We thought that was happening across this year prior to his ton in Sri Lanka. He'd had a far more average run of form. I remember seeing a few controversial tweets saying a few bad tests and he could be on the chopping block. That looks a long way away now, but yes, luck is always involved, but he's also just a supremely good batsman. So I think most of the credit has to go to him, irrespective of the few chances he has given up.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that is always said when it comes to drop catches is the batsman, he puts pressure on the fielding side with how he bats. I don't know if there's really any truth to that, but I know that's probably what Marnus
I
would
get it with
say.
running between the wickets. I don't get it with just general stroke play. Well, I think someone like a Warner puts pressure on fielding sides because he runs so aggressively. Labuschagne just kind of talks to himself and plays fidgety shots. And I don't know how that's putting pressure, other than the fact he's just a well-known cricketer. But who knows? He scores runs, so he can get away with it.
Yeah, well, regardless, Australia did finally declare and set the West Indies 498, just too shy of Ethan Prabs's prediction last night of 500. And well, as I mentioned at the start, it was really a repeat of their first innings, with Taj Nareen and Kraigg Brathwaite going even better actually in the first innings, becoming the first opening partnership since 2012 to score 100 runs on Australian soil as a visiting side. So yeah, a good stat for the West Indies there. But in the end, Stark was peppering away. He was hitting that length nicely, and in the end got Taj Nareen and really almost exposed him a little bit in a way. It was a pretty poor shot he ended up with. He looked completely out of control, trying to sort of push one off the back foot, and then a little bit of discussion. I know it's very early and very harsh when he's scored a 50 and a 45, but a bit of discussion that potentially as a slight weakness in his technique, Peerson.
You know, I admit I'm a bit of a traditionalist when it comes to cricket. So I like batsmen that are still. I rarely find these big triggers work. I find when you have more moving parts, if you make a mistake and you're out of form, it's a lot harder to get back into form. This was a critique labeled pretty much every single innings Rory Burns ever played in his England career. Is when you get slightly out of shape because of just the amount of things that have to be timed well in that technique, it became very hard for him to do things. My concern with Chanderpaul is that could be a problem that afflicts him down the line, particularly on wickets with more lavish movement. But I'll give him credit. He has actually scored runs this test. I don't think a 50 and a 45 can really be said as a failure. He's certainly had a promising start, but I do think there are some times where he will come unstuck with that technique. I know his father, of course, did it especially well, averaged 50 odd, scored 10,000 runs. I don't think Taj Narain, or however you say it, will be as good as his father, but you never know. My reaction is, and this is something I think I called out while watching it earlier in the day, was he does have a tendency to play across the ball a bit more than I'd like. I think it is something natural of a lot of left-handers, but he does, particularly with his cover drives, he seems to not always present the full face. And I think we saw that actually with his dismissal. But I'll give him some leeway. This was his debut test. He did hit almost 100 runs in his first test against a pretty accomplished Australian side in conditions foreign to him. So he'll be fine. I think he could be a find for them, but I do think there will be periods where when he loses form, he struggles a lot for runs for a prolonged period.
Yeah, it's quite funny with a lot of the talk for this test has been Steve Smith's move to be more side on with the ball. And then you've got Chanderpaul, who is very front on, almost facing the bowler. So it's a bit unfortunate for him because that sort of contrast in how well Smith has played, it sort of puts it into focus a bit more. But another batsman who has very much performed in foreign conditions today was Kraigg Brathwaite, not out on 101 overnight. And really, I thought a very, very good innings. He sort of soaked up pressure at the start, but then in the end, did some beautiful checked drives. That seemed to be his shot. And really, just looked very solid against anything that the Australians threw at him. What did you think?
Yeah, that's kind of how I viewed Brathwaite for a long time. Is he goes through peaks and troughs, as does every opening batsman. But I do like his attitude to cricket. He's that old style sit in, wear off the new ball, and then cash in. And I think we saw that quite well today. I must admit, with a strike rate of over 60, that was an uncharacteristically aggressive innings from a Kraigg Brathwaite perspective. But I think with the pressure largely off chasing 500, he's played that pretty well. It is, as I think we have to admit, a fairly placid wicket, but credit to him. He's worked out how to exploit it. And as you said, some of those drives later in the day were some of the most impressive shots I've seen all game. Whether he can carry that on long term and start scoring regular tons, I don't know. I've always thought he was a much better batsman than his figures suggest. I believe he only averages high 20s or low 30s in his career.
Yeah.
But it was an accomplished knock, and long may it continue.
Yeah, 34 from 79 matches, his average is. So, yeah, but looking at how he batted today, you would not think that there is stats. And I think he does average about, I think it could be 81 this year, I think. Wow, so he's perhaps having a bit of a late career flurry with the bat. But anyway, very good performance by him today. From Australia's perspective, there were perhaps a few little signs of the struggles that we just always seem to have in bowling in the fourth innings of a test match. There was a dropped catch by Mitchell Starc off Cam Green. But actually, for the most part, I don't know about you, I thought we actually bowled pretty well. Hazelwood, in particular, has been incredibly unlucky this whole test match. He was bowling absolutely beautifully, moving it both ways, but still hasn't got any success at all. And Lyon, with picking up 2 wickets, it looks like tomorrow he will be the one to go through it. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think and I know I've said this a couple times already, but I will say it again. This isn't a pitch that suits bowling. You hit pretty much 600 for 4 in the first innings. You hit 2 for 200 essentially in the second. The Windies are 3 for 200 in their second innings. So, bar that one innings where the Windies got bundled out for 280, this has been a very batting friendly wicket. So, I don't think you should expect, despite the quality of Australian bowling attack, them to be able to just roll through this side. The Windies, while they're clearly not as well resourced and as good of a side as the Australians, they do have a reasonable amount of fight behind them. So they are doing their job. And I think with that in mind, it's going to be tough for Australia to just bundle them out as swiftly as they may have hoped. Will they win? Yes. Will they do enough? Yes. And I actually think they have bowled pretty well considering the conditions. As you said, I think Hazelwood went quite unlucky for long phases. But they got their reward with the 3 wickets somewhat late in the day. So I think they'll manage to get them all out for 300 odd tomorrow and wrap up the game. It's not been a world-class bowling performance by any means, but it's been as good enough for the purposes that they're playing. And I think they've all outperformed their respective opposition in the WI seam attack.
Yeah, Mitch Starc becoming, I think, maybe the 3rd player or something to dismiss both a father and a son in his career. So a nice little stat. That's a vast ship stat, that one, I think.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. I quite like it.
One for the real diehard fans. But yeah, I think I probably agree. You wouldn't think they would go too much longer tomorrow. We saw that their middle order, well, it's nowhere near as strong as their 2 openers. But it'll be interesting to see. And maybe I've seen a couple of things. Maybe it'll be a chance for Nathan Lyon to once and for all silence all his doubters, which I think you might class yourself as, and
Yes,
deliver a 8 or 9 wicket haul in the 4th innings of a match or something.
Yeah, that won't happen. Well, I to be fair to Nathan Lyon, I do actually think he's a good cricketer. I have nothing against him as a cricketer. I think he's as good as anyone in world cricket at holding an end. When it comes to finishing teams off in the 4th innings, I just don't think that's his skill set. He's a top spin bowler for Australian wickets that can build pressure and allow whoever he's bowling with to tear through the opposition. That doesn't necessarily suit itself to that Asian style of spinner that can come in and essentially lead a side and take all the wickets. Does that mean he's not a good bowler? No, he's an excellent bowler for the purposes he's there for. I just don't think that purpose is rolling through a side in the 4th innings, and therefore he doesn't do it all too regularly. But you never know. I wouldn't be shocked if he took a 5 for tomorrow. Will it be a remarkable bowling performance from him? No, but when is it? It's solid. It'll be solid. It'll be dependable, and people will forget about it within a week. And that's exactly why Nathan Lyon is there. And that's not a bad thing, I don't think. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm predicting he'll get 4 or 5 tomorrow in a rather forgettable bowling performance.
Wow, I would predict him to tear through him, but I had one prediction come good with Kraigg Brathwaite making a century, so I might leave it on that. I'll retire on a high, I think, with my predictions. So anyway, yeah. All right, well, I think better get some sleep now. Of course, we've got the big Australia-Argentina match at 6 a.m. tomorrow, so will you be getting up for that one, Peerson?
I will certainly try. Whether I manage is another question, but I will try.
Yeah, very good. I think I'm in discussions of whether I'll be going down to Amy Park or Fed Square in the morning to watch it.
Oh, geez,
so
okay.
We'll see what happens. Yeah,
That'll be an interesting one.
Yeah.
Canberra doesn't do that level of celebration for sport, unfortunately, but
No,
I do quite like the atmosphere at Fed Square.
Yeah, I'm not sure it'll be much of a celebration tomorrow, to be honest, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm not confident, but you never know. Australia's the type of team, it's the type of country generally that turns up to events. So maybe they'll overperform. We'll find out.
Yeah, plenty to look forward to. But for now, goodbye, Peerson. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.